Hi, I'm Mark from Kicker Software, and today I'm going to show you how you can use Kicker to analyze a hand of poker. I'm going to analyze a hand of poker that I myself played a few years ago and see if I can determine if I might have made a mistake. The first step is to think about pre-flop ranges, my opening range and the villain's calling range. I was in the button and the villain was in the big blind. So there are a number of tools within Kicker that can help with this sort of analysis. This here is the hand history tool with a heat map here. This is showing which hands I opened with most frequently and which hands I opened with either quite infrequently or never from the position button. So you can see this is a kind of rough idea of the shape of my opening range as was. I've taken that and I've also applied use of the pre-flop player pool tendencies, which allow me to have a look at the kind of percentage frequencies that the players at the level that I play at generally were opening. So you can see they're generally opening about 46% of hands from the button. From the hand history, I was opening about 30%. So I've put myself on a range of around about 35%, something a bit like this, which I considered kind of considering the sort of hands you could see from my hand history and trying to come up with a range that I think would be relatively able to exploit opponents by maybe opening slightly tighter than them. But obviously you could put whatever ranges you want in here. And I've also put in a calling range for the villain based on these statistics from the pre-flop player pool tendencies. So you can see the big blind calling a button open is doing so 39.6% of the time and raising 10% of the time. That's from a quite statistically significant data set based on the hand histories that have been analysed by the Kicker software. And therefore, I've tried to put in a range that reflects that, with about 39.5% of hands being called and about 10% of hands being raised. Just using these slidey bars here, using the Sklansky-Carlson hand rankings method, it's determined that this is roughly the raising range. This is roughly the calling range. Now, obviously, you could come in and you could fiddle around with this if you think players are more likely to be doing some kind of bluff-free raises with maybe suited gappers or low-suited aces or low pocket pairs or whatever it is you think they might do. You could change this around. But the percentages are based on a pretty rigorous analysis of the player pool. So, if we go back into hand history, and the hand I want to look at is this one. I've sorted here. This is all the hands that I played where I opened from the button. I got a call from either the small or big blind, but just one player. And then I had the opportunity to continuation bet the flop. And these are all the hands where that was the case. And I was particularly interested in initially analysing this hand here. I had ace-6 offsuit, and the flop came 4 ace-10. I ended up losing 27 big blinds, but the hand went to the river. So if I double click that hand, you can see it will create me a scenario. It populates the hero range from my button open range I've defined and the villain range based on the big blind calling range. Stack sizes were 46, or effective stack sizes were 46. Heroes in position. Pot size was 6.5. It's populated all the data. So we press analyze, put in a name for our scenario, and it will take us to the flop. And here we have a load of equities listed. We have standard equity, improvability, nuts equity, which is the chance that this hand is a strong hand by showdown and wins, how often we're betting it, and the amount of time this hand is in the range. Now, our pre-flop ranges had all combos in at 100%, but you could put them in at 50% or 20% if you decided you'd want to open with some hands and fold with others. Fold with different variations of the combos, and you can see which combos we're talking about. So obviously pocket fours here are very strong hands because they're sets. We're actually looking at the villain's range here at the moment because the action is on the villain initially, and because the villain is out of position. We also have this information here, which are equity histograms, which show the distribution of the hands in both the hero's range and the villain's range, and where they sit in terms of what percentage equity each hand has. So you can see at the moment, the hero's range is quite significantly ahead of the villain's range. In fact, there's a 27% equity advantage and a 4% nuts advantage. We can see the nuts advantage here. You can see we've got more nutted hands. We've got a similar number of draws. This purple section here denotes draws in the nuts equity section of the histogram on the flop. So in this case, I'm going to assume that the villain just checked their entire range. So the action moves on to the hero, and now we have the hero's range, which is me, or was me. So we can see here that we have all the sets. So pocket aces, pocket tens, pocket fours, they're all here. We also have ace 10, and we also have ace 4. So we need to determine which hands we are going to bet with, because looking here, we can see that in the real scenario, the hero actually bet 3 big blinds. The villain did check as well. This, on the previous decision point, this section here allows us to determine or to see quickly what actually happened. So let's rattle through and see what we would pick. I think to start with, if we turn everything off, then we turn monsters on, which are those ones we were just looking at, sets and 2 pairs, and also all strong hands. And we highlight all of those and bet all of them. That's a good starting point, I think, for betting all of our strong hands, which is going to be all our monsters and all our ace high hands. So basically all our aces. Then let's reset the filters again. And if we turn off all the flush filters and then add all the flush draws, I think we would bet all the flush draws here. So we bet all the flush draws. I think on this sort of board, I'm happy to bet all my gut shots. So let's bet those. So we're up to 57% of all combos. Now, what I've done here is bet all my strong hands, all my draws. I mean, in reality, you might want to check back some of your strongest hands in order to have some strength in your checking basket. In this case, I'm electing not to do that, but obviously that's a perfectly valid thing to do. But here we're just demonstrating what you can do with the software. One of the things I tend to do in spots like this now is use the software to have a look at what's the strongest hand that I'm actually checking here, and it's pocket kings. That's got the most equity. We go right down to the kind of weakest hands here, just like 8, 9, 7, 8. They've just got very little equity here. And because of that, I'm going to grab a bunch of them and I'm going to bet some of them, just so that I've got some hands that have basically certainly no current showdown value. So I've now got a betting range of about 65%, and I'm going to click bet. So it now comes to the villain, and in reality what the villain did was raise to 6 big blinds. Let's just have a quick look at the equity distribution now in the histograms. You can see that now we've got lots and lots of really strong hands because we've skewed our betting range with a lot of value. There are some hands that don't have much showdown value and some hands that are draws, but there's a lot of value now. So we're way ahead of the villain's range now. In fact, we're 35% ahead, and we've got quite a significant nuts advantage. However, the villain raised, so we now have to consider what hands would the villain raise with. Well, I think they're going to raise with their sets, and they're probably going to raise with their 2 pair hands, and that's all of these here at the top of the equity distribution. So let's say they raise with those hands. What other hands would they raise with? Well, it's worth bearing in mind that at the moment we don't know how many hands they would raise with. However, if we go to this tool here, which is the flop player pool tendencies, this actually allows you to put in filters and, using the hand histories, determine based on what the aggressor's bet size on the flop was when they had a chance to continuation bet and they chose to, what the reaction of the player pool then generally is. And you can do that without applying a filter, just to generic hands, or in this case what we're going to do is apply this flop texture, the 4 of hearts, ace of spades, 10 of spades. We apply that texture and you can see it now sets both filters to flush draw, straight draw, and ace high with 2 Broadway cards, and flops of that texture when you bet around about half pot, which is what we did bet. We bet 3 big blinds into a pot of 6.5. You can see that we get calls 48% of the time, we get folds 44% of the time, and we get raised 7% of the time. So that's the key figure here, 7%. We need to get the villain to 7% because that's roughly the amount of time that villains are raising in spots like this. So we've currently got 3%, and we've got basically all his strong value hands. So I think it's fair to say probably all the nut flush draws, which you can determine by using these filters here. So let's pop in the nut flush draws. We now get to 5%. We still need some more. So let's turn off all the filters and have a look at which hands have got the strongest nuts equity here. And it's Queen Jack of Spades, Queen 4 of Spades. They've got very strong nuts equity, as have these hands here. So let's just grab all of these hands with the strongest nuts equity, which they've got for various reasons. Some of them are, well, they're all flush draws, but some of them also have different ways of runner straight possibilities. So let's raise all of those, and there we go, we get to 7%. That feels like a kind of raising range that a villain might well have here. So we select villain raises to 6 big blinds. Now let's have another look at the histograms again. Now you can see that the villain's range is now quite significantly ahead of the hero, and in fact you can see that the hero is now 20% behind in terms of equity and 23% behind in terms of nutted hands. So we now need to determine what hands would we call with, because that's what the hero did in reality. So I think hands like sets, these hands here, I think we would re-raise. So we need to look at what we would call with, because that's what we actually did. So what are we left with in terms of calling hands? Well, we have a lot of ace hands and we have a lot of draws. So let's go to the draws first. Let's see flush draws. I think we would call with all our flush draws. We may re-raise with some flush draws, that's possible, but I'm going to put them in as calls. And then we have some strong ace hands. So let's have a look at those. They would be in here as strong hands. So let's select these. So we have a load of ace hands. Let's pick the ones that have the most equity. In fact, let's pick the strong hands that also have backdoor flush possibilities. So we can do that by doing this. So there we go. These hands all have backdoor flush possibilities. Let's call with those hands too. That gets us up to 25% of hands. We can see, by the way, at any point, that's our current calling range. That's our raising range. And this is our checking range. So let's reset the filters. So these are all the hands we have that are calling. You can see this has now turned green, meaning that the ace-6 offsuit hand that we had is a call according to this. So let's select call. You can pick any card you want for the turn, but in reality what happened was it was the 4 of spades. So let's carry on with the actual scenario. Okay, you can now see that with the card that came, the 4 of spades, which is very good for the villain because it improves all his strong hands, all his strong made hands, and it also brings all his flushes in. So actually he's now basically just got pure value. He's got no bluffs, and all of our hands are now behind the villain's range. So the villain's in very good shape and we're in very bad shape here. The villain checks. The villain may well bet some of his strongest hands here. So let's take some of his hands. Let's take his very strong, the strongest made hands here. And let's say that the villain's going to bet them 50% of the time, which you can do like that by selecting 50. I think the villain may well do that with the flushes as well. The villain may not do that with the nutted flushes, but may do it with the non-nut flushes, protecting against another spade falling. Let's say that they do that 50% of the time as well. Okay, so that means that the checking range is going to be this, and the villain's betting range is also going to contain some combos of those hands as well, some of the time. But you can see that the strength of the checking range is actually has equity of 90, and the strength of the betting range has 86. In reality, the villain checked, so that range will be carried forward. And the action's now back on the hero. I think in this spot, let's have a look at the strongest hands that we have here, and they are well, seeing as we re-raised all of our sets, we don't have any of those, but we do have lots of flushes here. I'm not sure in reality whether I would bet the flush now because of the paired board. Probably would some of the time. So let's use the filters to show us all of our made flushes, which are these, and then let's have a look at all the hands that are not nut flushes. I think all of those we probably would bet, let's say 50% of the time. And maybe we take the king high flushes and we would bet them some proportion of the time, say 30% of the time. Okay, we take everything else forward though via a check, which is what happened in reality. We now choose the river card, which in reality was the 5 of hearts, we can see from here. And now what happened is the villain bet 18 big blinds. So what range is the villain going to do that with? Well, the villain doesn't actually have that many hands left now. And in fact, as we know, looking at the histogram, all the villain has is value hands. And I think the villain would now bet all of their hands. They've got full houses, they've got flushes, they've got everything. I think the villain's betting range here, let's whack that up to 100, is everything. So we say villain bets 18 big blinds. We're back on the hero again. The histogram looks exactly the same. We've just got a load of rubbish here we really can't call with. And what are we left with? Well, I think we can call with all the flushes. So let's filter on made flushes. We can call with those. And what else have we got? Well, if we assume that the way that we've modelled the villain's range and the way that the villain's range has modified throughout the streets correctly, we actually have 0% equity for all of the hands in our remaining range, which must surely mean we shouldn't call with them. And if we jump to the hand, ace-6 of spades, we can see that's in the middle of the hands that we should definitely be folding. And in reality, when I played this hand a few years ago, I called with this hand on the river, which I think based on this analysis would indicate that that was a clear mistake. Thanks for watching.